Okay, so this week we're going to be taking a look at the principles of design, but before we continue with the principles, we need to go back and take another look at the elements. So we're going to do just a little bit of a review, and this is really just because it is important to know the terminology so that we can intelligently discuss the design work. I will always be looking in your discussions for the use of the proper terminology. Our first element is space. Space is the area we get to work with. In print, it's usually something that's rectangular. If it's a billboard, it's huge and it's going to probably be done in landscape mode. A print ad is usually done in portrait, but not always. It's really going to depend on the project. Mobile design is usually done in portrait to fit on a cell phone, but sometimes it's done in landscape mode for playing games. It sort of just depends on the project that you're doing. The stuff we put into our space is the positive space or figures. It can also be called foreground. The remainder of it is the background or ground, also known as negative space. Negative space is important because it gives your eye a good place to rest. It gives your brain a chance to process what you see. Did you know there's even negative space in motion design? After an action shot in a movie, they normally cut to a slow scene. Sometimes after a lot of action, you'll see it cut to maybe a landscape view, something that's a wide shot. There is a reason for doing that, and that is so that the viewer can process what they just saw. Our next element is line. Remember that line can be described as a point moving through space. Lines can be solid, they can be dashed, they can be straight, they can be curvy, whatever we need them to be. Lines are expressive. Lines can be used to define the area we're going to be using. Lines are used to create shapes, and they are directional. They will help you move the eye across the composition, or maybe by the style of the line it can evoke emotion. Connect the ends of a line and you get our next element, which is shape. Shapes are going to be organic or geometric, or they could be a combination. They can be made without lines with soft edges, or they can be made using hard lines. Size is going to be dependent on what is in the space or how big the space is. A 14-point font is big on a business card, but not so much so on a full-size newspaper. If something's bigger, it's going to appear to be more important. Smaller things aren't so much so. So it really depends on what's all in the layout as to what size it's going to actually be. So we may need to have exact sizes to define the space, like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, or maybe a 4-inch by 5-inch space. We may need to define the size of a font as being a 12-point font or a 24-point font. Bigger screams, "I'm important." It looks like it's closer to you. Something that's smaller says, "I'm not so important," and it recedes into the background. Our next element is color. Hue is the name of the color, like red, blue, and green. Value is going to be how light or dark that color is, and saturation is how pure the color is, and we're going to have a whole section around color and color theory. Our next element is texture. Texture is rough or smooth or tree bark or how soft something is, but for print and on screen we can't really do texture unless you are relying on the feel of the paper in print. We can't feel something that's on a billboard. We can't feel the actual texture on screen. We feel the texture of the screen. Sometimes in print we can add texture, and that can be shown sometimes with the feel of the paper, but mostly we rely on simulated texture. we look at images. Patterns can create texture through the repetition of shape. Paper is going to be the one thing that does have texture because it can be rough or smooth or glossy or maybe soft. Our last element is value. Value is how light or dark something is. Designs that are bright are called high key. Designs that are mostly dark are called low key. The more variation that you have as far as lights and darks, the more three-dimensional your 2D design is going to appear.